What's going on, everybody? It's Ron Brown, LMT, the People's Fitness Professional, and I have the brother Ken Granderson. Is that how you pronounce it? That's the okay. Just to
Yes,
make,
sir.
sometimes I butcher people's names. I just want to make sure. Thank you for coming out this evening. I really appreciate you. And first off, we're gonna go with the title. The title is Self-Determination Through Technology. Okay, and I want to go into your history. Who are you? Let's go into that. Who are you and where were you born and your upbringing? So let's start there.
Okay, well, Ron, should I say Ron Brown? What's the best way to, you know,
Ron, Ron is fine. Ron
Ron?
Brown, call me Ron Brown. It doesn't matter.
All right, like folks used to say, just don't call me late for dinner.
Right.
So, Ron, thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, my name is Ken Granderson. I am a child of the neighborhood formerly known as Die Bed-Stuy. That's what we called it back in the days. I was a teenager in the late 70s. Um, you know, Grew up pretty close to Boys and Girls High, A Train, Utica Ave, A Train station. And, you know, upbringing, basically blue collar. Daddy worked for the post office. Mom worked office jobs at churches, actually Methodist churches, and left the Brooklyn area in 1980 to go up to Boston. I was, doing pretty well with math and science, and ended up at MIT. And I stayed there after I stayed in the Boston area after I graduated and reconnected with a passion for computers. And when I say reconnected, I got introduced to computers in high school, but in the late 70s, my family, we couldn't afford computers. So I got into stereo and hi-fi and started DJing, which ended up being a business that I ran. I was like the number one DJ doing black college parties in the Northeast, in New England area, I will say. Like Dartmouth College up in New Hampshire down to like New Haven, Connecticut, during the 80s. And end of the 80s, I reconnected with the whole computer thing, got into it pretty heavy, made some programs that let me quit my day job. That set the stage for this idea of self-determination through technology. So I was working, a mainstream tech job, made some programs that that basically enabled me to made as much money for me as I was making from my job. Bottom line, I know this is not necessarily a show and tell show, but I tell people Google me, and you can find on my website. You'll see, for example, this book, Windows Gizmos, that has my program in it, with my company name, Inner City Software, and in the thanks. I go and thank folks who inspired me, et cetera, because they printed everything that I wrote in this book verbatim. And so in the acknowledgments and thanks, you'll see, I'm thanking my family, blah, 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 folks. And then I mentioned Martin Luther King Jr., of course, right? But I said Marcus Garvey, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, El Haj Malik El Shabazz. But as Billy Mays, I think it was, said, but wait, there's more. At the bottom, I have the Honorable Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam for continuous wake-up calls and reminders of the conditions of the have-nots of America. Because when I say I grew up blue collar, we never had a whole bunch of things, but I had the fortunate luck of being born into an intact and drama-free family. And I have learned to not take that for granted, and realize how that kind of put me on a track where I was able to, move forward and not have to have folks who should have been supporting me sabotaging me, like I've seen happen too often in many of our families. So I'm just very, very grounded and clear about that. And I thank, some of our brothers and sisters who have made sure that many of us did not fall through the cracks, and that all inspired me to focus on building technologies to inform, educate, and inspire Black people, including blackfacts.com, the first Black history search engine I set up in 1997, run to the present day. Go there right now. Today is Lena Horne's birthday. We have Black history videos for every day of the year, and etc. I'm going to stop and pause because I'm one of these folks. You can tell I'm excited about this, and so you got to stop me and get a word in edgewise. So I'm gonna pause right there,
Okay.
and follow your lead on where you want this conversation to go, because I really appreciate what you're doing and the opportunity to share something that I think we don't know what capabilities we have, and especially today with where technology is. I'm glad to have the chance to show your audience the potential that is literally in the palm of their hands today.
Right. Now, you said you grew up in a family that was, I think you said, undisrupted or
intact, meaning my daddy was there. Okay.
intact. Okay, so your dad was there.
Yeah.
Your mom. So you grew up in a two-family household and all that. I mean, yeah, two-parent household and things like that. Okay, so did you have any siblings and things?
Yeah.
Okay.
I got one older brother,
Mhm.
who actually, introduced me when I was graduating from college. He introduced me to literature of self-improvement that actually changed my direction, because I went to MIT, prestigious school, all that kind of good stuff. So I knew all I had to do was graduate from college, and I'm going to make more money than daddy. The bad news about that is that I did not have any aspirations past getting a job working for the man.
Right.
It was when I was introduced to literature that helped me understand that could be more opportunity for me to do something with a greater impact. Mm-hmm. And because I happened to be in technology at that time, I was able to do things like put the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation online in '98. I put the government of St. Lucia online a dozen years ago. Boston's Roxbury community, the neighborhood I was living in, the Black neighborhood, put them online. I put the Black newspaper online. Those are the sort of kind of things that you can do with technology if you have the mindset. And we can do these things in other areas, is what I'm trying to really, that's my message really to other folks, is it depends on what you're focusing on. You can focus on, everyone's focusing on just, paying the bills and whatever, but it just takes a little bit extra that you might focus in a certain way. Most of us just do it for our own, but I knew that I didn't have the opportunities that I had because folks would just worrying about their own self. It was because of people who I never met, who they knew they would never meet me, that they opened doors for me. And so that is just part of my own personal philosophy, that, I place a high priority on using the talents that I've developed to try and make sure that I pay it forward and, and live up to the sacrifices of my ancestors, to put it like that.
Right. So now you were inspired to get into the technology around the 80s, you're saying?
I was first introduced to it in the late 70s.
In the late 70s. Okay, so I want to stop there. So in the late 70s, what was the technology like?
Yeah, man, people would laugh at it. School had a digital PDP-11 computer, look like small file cabinet, black and white monitors, or just one color green. Nothing that was, or either that, or my first programming project, we did this class at NYU. They had these printout printers, and we would play this Star Trek game where it would print out what was supposed to be the quadrant in space, and you'd say, oh, what am I going to do? Pick number 1 to 8. Number 1, shoot the phasers, and they would print out the next. That was where the tech was back then.
Okay.
So,
and you said people laughed at it.
Well, today they would laugh at it, is what I'm saying. Back then, it was just like, oh, wow, this is great. This is great.
Right. So what was the first computer you were introduced to? Was it like IBM, or was it
Yeah, well, I mean, back then, was it Poly Prep? I think downtown on J Street, but it might have been another place. You had these big computer rooms, and I'm old enough to when we had stuff on cards, so you would have these punch cards, and you take a set of punch cards, and they would print out all this big green paper, and So I'm saying this is like the old school stuff. Nothing. Personal computers didn't happen until the '80s,
okay?
right?
Now in the 70s,
Mhm.
you were interested in computers. How about your peers or other Black people around you?
No, now, I did go to a very small, mostly white school, St. Anne's School in Brooklyn Heights. So out of my graduating class of 70, there were 10 Black students, 6 girls, 4 boys. I was the only one who was interested in computers out of the boys. um, yeah, I mean, it really back then only the nerds were really interested in computers, But when I went to college, right,
Mhm.
the nerds at MIT is another level of nerd, right? So these were these guys who are like beards and they have their life in their backpack and they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I'm like, okay, like I like computers and they got computers here. Those are the computer guys, but there's girls over there. God, well, I think I'm gonna keep DJing. So I left the computer. I left the computers alone until the late '80s.
Okay. So now the 70s,
Hmm?
you left the computers. There was a question that I had that was it was just right there. Oh my God.
Well, I said I
Okay.
started DJing.
No, 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 not that one.
Hmm?
So before you, okay, what was your experience like at MIT at that time?
Well, so here's the interesting thing. This was 4 years after busing riots, where the guy was stabbed with the American flag, kind of thing, and people are like, "Oh, it's so racist, so racist." Um, I get off the Greyhound bus. I got my duffel bag with my gear, et cetera, et cetera. I have no idea what I'm up for. Walk from the train. I see on this little hill by the student center table, Black Student Union. I'm like, I'm safe, right? And so my experience was very Black
Mhm.
because whether it was, the Black Student Union, and most of the Black students, we knew each other, et cetera, or especially after 1982, I pledged Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, which, one of the quote divine nine, nine predominantly Black fraternities and sororities, which that it really connected me to other Black college men throughout the country. That I did a bunch of traveling, but but my college experience, although I was in Boston, was very Black. I'm DJ. I'm DJing the Black parties, so I have led a very unique experience in that way. you know.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's unpack that a little bit, just a little bit.
Okay, okay.
All right. So MIT, very just a Black experience.
Mhm,
When I think of MIT, when I was in high school, there were
mhm,
people trying to really get into MIT, and that was the first time I heard about MIT,
mhm.
and eh, the just like I didn't want to say it like this, but like the so-called nerds
Yeah,
went
nerd
to
pride,
MIT.
man. I love it. I could show you my nerd pride stickers. Yeah.
And so
Mhm,
you had, but you had a Black experience there now, and this
mhm.
was in Boston. Now, from what I
Cambridge. I'm sorry, Cambridge is across the river from Boston.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, Boston area. Culturally, honestly, it's a lot more progressive. Uh,
Oh, okay, because that's where I was going. Okay, yeah,
yeah,
that's where I was going with that. Yeah, because Boston, from what I hear, is like more like racist.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the racist thing, right? So when I would come home and visit, people are like, "Oh man, Boston is so racist," and I would say, "Yeah, man, like it's so terrible. Like what happened, to that brother Yusuf Hawkins, and then what they did to that Abner Louima brother and Amadou Diallo. Oh no, that was all New York. Worst racist incident while I was there. Charles Stewart kills his wife, says the black man did it. So my point being, bro, there's racism everywhere."
Mm-hmm.
All right, and I didn't even get to Howard Beach. Okay, so yeah, all of these things happen when I'm in Boston, which is supposed to be so racist, but um, but at the same point, yeah, Boston, the Boston side of things, Boston definitely more conservative, et cetera, et cetera. Cambridge is just more Harvard, MIT. It very influenced a lot of the culture, more laid back, more of your ally white people,
Like liberals.
in Cambridge,
Yeah. Yeah.
But when I say it was a very black experience, meaning I pretty much spent all my time, um, in college sort of venues, and frankly, many of the black students were like tourists in a sense. We went into the community, to get haircuts, to get ethnic food,
Right.
and to get weed.
Okay.
All right. So that was we didn't, we it wasn't until after that I really started connecting with, native black Bostonians. In my last 20 years, I was stayed there until 2018. I made what I, in retrospect, consider like a major strategic um, error in staying in Boston. When I graduated, a lot of my peers would go to DC or they go to Atlanta. Why? Because black folks were doing stuff there.
Right.
And I reasoned that, well, if you stay somewhere where there is a bigger need, you can build something from the ground up, and you'll be like,
the main person. Yeah.
the main person, whatever. What I didn't account for is what I ended up viewing as the inertia, stagnation, maybe it's conditioning of Black Boston, that I say to people, think about people of note that have come out of Black Boston. Now you have to, you need to remove the sports folks and the entertainment folks, because those are areas where we've been allowed to rise, for a long time.
Right.
Think of anyone, name a name, in business, in medicine, academia, politics or whatever, that came out of Black Boston, right? If you were there in 1984, the name Mel King might mean something to you. He ran for mayor in Boston. He didn't win, but he made history. That's 84. You got to fast forward to the mid 2010s for Ayanna Pressley to think about anyone, a name that you would be like, oh, this is someone in Boston, Black Boston, who's doing something. And so my point being that, I, built websites like Roxbury.com that, I always say to people, Google my name, you'll see my personal website. I've archived everything I've done. I got an 8-minute video where you will walk through of Roxbury.com from 23 years ago, where you will see we had community news, we had self-service events and business directory listings. That's 2 and 4 years before Yelp and Eventbrite were even founded. We had cutting edge tech for our community there, but I was never able to take that and kind of make a lateral move into the business world with it, and it's because the people there didn't have those connections. The Black folks there, or if they did, I found Black Boston to be a bit insular. I was an outsider, even though I adopted the Black community there. I bought a home there. Had my office there. My home was 1 block from the Caribbean Carnival location. So I was dead smack in the hood. All right, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I was, like I say, I was gave it my best shot. Came back to New York in search of folks who had a little more vision for bigger possibilities. Because, as I will suggest to folks, and you can see in the 1996 video that you'll find on my website, on a project we called Inner City Access, where you'll see both me and my current business partner Dale. We had both had black hair at the time. Where it was 8 of us in total. We put Boston's black neighborhoods online. We had websites for the communities. We didn't have money. We didn't ask anybody. We didn't have connections. We just did it. That is my message about technology. It is the most powerful equalizing tool, I believe, in human history. And today it is literally in the palms of our hands. They say that our phones are more powerful than things we sent, folks to the moon with. But what do we use it for? Cat videos and watching augmented, posterior bouncing. It's like, come on, people.
Well, I want to get to that now.
Okay.
Back to your DJ life. Let's unpack that a little bit. So your DJ life. What kind of DJ equipment did you use? Did you use the classic techniques?
Which is so interesting. Yeah, when you say techniques, and you know what, I didn't never
1200s.
Oh no. When you say okay, yeah. I actually never had the 1200 Mark IIs. I actually had a 1800 and 1600, the original series, right? But I was gonna say I don't know, and maybe we do it on another show if you want. If we could do screenshots, but I could show you an image, of me and my partner sitting on the set, because it was when you went to one of my gigs. I'll put it like this: we're sitting on a bunch of speakers. The ones on the bottom were 4 foot by 4 foot, folded horns. They weighed 200 pounds apiece. I had a digital synthesizer that synthesized an octave lower than they could actually write on the records. So you got it right here. Yes, yeah.
That's interesting.
Do not play. and we played. Basically, it was like, say, a mix of sort of R&B, dance music, and hip hop. And when I say on the hip hop, right? Well, your Caribbean music hadn't really crossed over at that point, right? What was very interesting about music back then was that it was very local, meaning you had in New York, you had folks playing one kind of music. So, for example, to this day, you could probably play "Love Is the Message," right? And the thing is, folks in other parts of the country never heard of it, right? And then you had, for example, the sound of LA records. You had like some Miami sound. You had some folks in the Midwest, and then you ended up my freshman sophomore year, the Minneapolis sound started coming up, etc. Go. You didn't hear those different musics back in the late 70s, early 80s, because we just had radio, and radio is very, very local in range. There was no internet, right? And so you only heard music in your culture. And what was really interesting was, perfect example, my boy Mark Petty from Detroit, sophomore year, he comes back, and he's like, well, what are you talking about? The time. He was like, cool, get it up the stick. I'm like, what are you talking about? Here, listen to this. I'm like, cool, get it up the stick. Because they were, one of Prince's protege bands, and they were doing gigs all in that area. And so, so because we had Black folks coming from all over, it became sort of a melting pot of music. But the Caribbean music, because back then, hardly had, I might have known 2 Haitian folks. Yeah, Jamaicans had started coming in, in slow numbers, back then. So you heard a little bit of reggae, but not much. It was a little later that picked up. But then also during that decade, the music shifted. And late 70s, before rap was what we called on wax, you know, okay, in Brooklyn, you're in Bronx, Queens, you're doing block parties, folks are rapping, but it was not, it was ignored by the industry. King Tim the Third by Fatback Band, about 8 months before Rapper's Delight, was the first rap record, you know, on wax. Then Rapper's Delight came later, changed the whole thing. But yeah, but their whole thing and you know, obviously they took Good Times, you know, good. We were cutting and spinning Good Times, you know, Good Times.
Right.
Now Rogers.
Wow, you guys were cutting Good Times.
Yeah, yeah. But see, Good Times was the baseline of.
Oh, right. You read about that.
But no, I'm
Yeah,
saying it
yeah.
was the baseline of a bunch of things, right? So, yeah. Good,
Right. Good times.
you
Right.
know, then
Yeah.
right. So the Rappers Delight took it. Vaughn Mason's Bounce Rock Skate, bounce, boom, boom, do. You know, there was so many records that took Good Times. They changed a little bit of it, you know, but I don't remember where I was going with that. Oh, but rap, right? And this is where some of your audience is going to get mad at me, but it's okay. Because fast forward, I stopped DJing in the early 90s because I refused to go where the music was going. Here's what I mean. We street DJs and stuff, doing block parties, whatever. Rap was what I always call our urban folk music. It was us being able in the communities, being able to say what we wanted to say, show up, and this and that and the other. The beginning genres or subjects of rap were mostly around a couple of subjects. I'm the baddest in the game, or throw your hands in the air. You finish the. You can finish the
Yeah. Wait,
right.
Mike just don't care. Right.
These were what I call communal celebrations of joy and culture. A little bit later, in the middle of the decade, you have folks like Grandmaster Flash, Furious Five doing the message, and
Right.
it's so interesting. A couple of years ago, for the first time, I got to meet Grandmaster Flash, and I saw a presentation of his where he actually had a formula about the number of rotations. He calls it like I don't know if it's 3x plus 2 or whatever, but mathematically, if you knew enough about music structure, most dance music is 4/4 time, whatever, and you knew how to backspin or just blend well. I blended more than I cut, right? You would spin the record back a certain number of revolutions, usually where you might have it marked, you know, to a certain cue point, whatever. Flash had a formula of the number of rotations, whatever, to keep it going. And I was just so impressed by the way he had broken it down. I was like, bro, you have no idea, you know. But I digress. You know, some of the things that they did, like the message, you know, they were reporting on challenging situations in the neighborhood and all.
Right.
Which you know, I think is very important. But things started taking a turn in a different direction. You know, as typified by the 1989 record Self-Destruction, where there were elements of the community that have always been with us, but they were formerly on the outskirts, and
Right.
they were not encouraged or normalized. And
Hold on. I gotta drop a bomb on that. Say
okay,
that one more time, please.
I mean, all right, yeah.
They were
So
on the outskirts, but they would not encourage.
they were not encouraged and normalized. So
They would not encourage and normalize.
we all know that we've been dealing with institutional racism, and it has created things like, you know, the you know, prison pipeline, etc. So we know Black men have always you know, ended up being unjustly over prosecuted, etc., etc., etc. But back when I was a teenager, you know, going to jail was something you were embarrassed about. That was not a badge of honor. That was not how you know, made your bones. And you know, things shifted where, and I personally, this is just my own, you know, theory, right? I'm not a philosopher or, a social scientist or whatever, but if you're in the suburbs and you got football and, little league and all this stuff, you got lots of opportunities for young men to burn off that testosterone. That testosterone that wants to be the baddest, MF in the neighborhood. That testosterone that wants to show, I'm bigger, I'm better, I'm cooler, or whatever. And if you don't have those things, then you have a higher possibility of that energy going into a direction where you get attention and respect, not from achievements that everyone will be happy about, but by making people afraid of you and by doing things that are like, oh, you're the toughest, you're the baddest because you can beat, MFs down or whatever. And so, I think because so many of our communities do not have, those, the little leagues, scouts, they or just all kind of things to help it engage and direct, that energy, especially that male energy. I fear that becomes a melting pot, of it just takes, a little trouble here and there, but then to make it worse, when you have certain kinds, there's been drugs in the community since forever, in every community, right?
Yeah.
But there's different kind of drugs and different kind of things. And let's say with cocaine, I've never been to Colombia, but I have a feeling people don't get strung out on chewing the coca leaf. All right. They're up in the mountains. They need it for the oxygen, thin air, whatever. But powder cocaine, yeah, it can mess you up, but you got to be rich to get messed up with powder cocaine. So it's got a self-limiting thing. Freebase came after that. It was another chemical processing that made it cheaper and more powerful. And when you do that, anyone who smoked weed, will remember, back in the day will remember, you could get ounces, but that costs like $40. I got $40. You give me a dime bag, nickel bag, tray bags, loose joints. Folks don't have, when you don't have a lot of money, you got to be able to get it in small quantities. And when they started processing this stimulant, the cocaine stimulant, and synthesizing it more and removing some of the buffers that Mother Nature had in the coca leaf, and making it more powerful and cheaper, you create a vicious cycle of, you can afford to get a little bit, and what I've heard with some of these, you spend after your first hit, you end up chasing a high you'll never get again, but it's like a perfect storm of a vicious cycle where little bit of money, so you can do it, and get you in, and then you need more and more. Then crack came, and you got more money. So I've observed in over my life in different industries, whether it is sports, entertainment in terms of movies, as soon as big money gets involved, it changes it. Meaning, I don't think that you had in the 50s, 40s, whatever, folks in sports who were getting into it to try to get rich as their main thing. Or in music. Yes, you've always had some people who made records, right? But once you get big money into stuff, you're going to attract people who will sell their own grandmother for the right price. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened with the drugs, right? We've always been able to sell weed and this and that, but but it was with crack, which just the mechanics of it created this very fast way to generate lots of money. And then you started having automatic weapons. And that creates an environment where you have people who can make incredible amounts of money by terrorizing our neighborhoods.
Right.
But then you had rappers who embraced it.
Talk to him.
I used to argue that the quote gangster rap was like a cancer in our communities. I was like, how do we go from say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud to I say I don't like saying words and that the Klan is jealous they didn't come up with. I'm not going to say that word that was the last word that many of our ancestors heard as the noose closed around their neck. I refuse to just use it casually. As Richard Pryor said, when he went to Africa, he didn't see, no soft or hard R's. Okay. So how did we make that transition? I believe folks sold out. I believe that there were, well, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around, but just like, but when I mentioned like movies and sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much money do you think, The Wizard of Oz made? Who knows? The point is, no one knows and no one cares.
Right.
Why is it when a movie comes out, it's like, how much does it make at the box office? Well, if my kin ain't in it or I ain't got money in it, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It does not matter. If someone is playing ball, someone's making a record, ooh, how much money? Unless they're your friend or they're going to lend you some money, it doesn't matter. But that's what we focus on.
Mm-hmm.
The money, and what I saw was, when I debated folks about this, people would say, oh, folks was getting paid or whatever. And I'm like, like you're saying that, like, that's an excuse. I'm not a religious person, but, according to, the Christian narrative, Judas sold out Jesus for 40 pieces of silver. I don't know what the going rate is for selling out your community, but, I do know that only a small handful of them actually got paid. And quite a few of them had, when you mentioned nerds earlier, I've embraced the word nerd because I say the retirement plan is much better than gangsters. Hello. So, when I used to question these things, people would be like, oh man, this got a slamming beat. I'm like, did you see the bass bottoms that I had? I understand beat. If it's really about the beat, then the beat, you could have that beat jamming to some Public Enemy, to some KRS-One, to some X-Clan, some Poor Righteous Teachers.
Right.
You don't have to have that banging beat, to talking about, the neighborhood is not just that the neighborhood is messed up and you could get shot, but you get shot because I'm the one pulling the trigger. Whether it was glorifying it or just normalizing it. I believe that we have a whole generation of urban Black kids who grew up in neighborhoods where I say, my neighborhood, I call it the neighborhood formerly known as Do or Die Bed-Stuy. Bed-Stuy was considered a real tough neighborhood. I did not grow up in fear that every loud noise could have been gunfire. I did not grow up that way. I grew up being concerned about some of the local gangs, and I'm a skinny dude with glasses, so I was well suited, justified to be concerned. But I was not, in mortal fear that anything could jump off at any time, and that it could be over some stupid, ignorant stuff, like people getting jealous about some kind of foolishness, or you mad about someone who lives on a street that you don't even own no real estate on.
Right.
Often named after some slavers or something. I'm like, what is wrong with us? So I stopped DJing because I refused to play music that, called us, or our women out of our names. I refused to do it. I couldn't feel good about myself, doing things that are playing stuff that was just like, I'm thinking about, you're making me think about something that happened a year ago. I visited Boston. A old friend and roommate bought the Black newspaper there. It's called the Bay State Banner, right? He bought it from the original founder who ran it for like 60 years, right? And I went to this gala that they had. And I met his wife for the first time. And when she found out who I was, she was like, "Oh my gosh, you helped me get through college." She was like, it's like you were my therapy for dealing with these white folks and this and that. And it was because I created these experiences of folks getting together and having a good time, being playing all black music, and all, and that's what I enjoyed doing. I've tried to take that into the tech space and create technologies that celebrate our successes, that talk about those of us who have beat the odds, who have done incredible things, because so many of us have done incredible things. But bro, one of the reasons that I'm so appreciative of you doing what you're doing is that we are so bad at telling the good news about those of us who are doing wonderful things. Like I want to name a couple of folks, as you mentioned, oh, you heard about MIT, whatever, and people get into these names and this and that and the other, right? Prestige. It ain't about that. I want to name a couple of my classmates, because folks don't know. My classmate and friend Paula Goodwin, she homegirl from Detroit. She used to be in the chemical engineering department at MIT, and guess what her job there was?
What's that?
She was the chair of the department. Right now, there's a sister named Kristalla Prather. She is the chair of the Department of Chemical Engineering. Paula was a Biden appointee of science, some science advisory. Another sister, April Erickson Jackson, born right here in Bed-Stuy, but she grew up in Cambridge. And she actually did her undergrad work at MIT. I think it was at Howard that she did her like a PhD and stuff. She's been at NASA for 30 years or so. Biden made her Assistant Secretary of Defense of Science and Technology. These are sisters, there. I got a friend here in Brooklyn, brother named John Henry Thompson. Look him up. You'll see him in Black Inventors. In the 90s, he was working for a company called Macromedia. They had a program called Director that brought animation to Macs and PCs. He wrote a programming language called Lingo that was instrumental in folks doing animation on desktop PCs. So when you see the Bigfoot AI videos and stuff that people make now, he is, a predecessor of that. We have Black people who our fingerprints are on all kind of things that we don't know about, because we want to talk about which rapper is banging which model, instead of talking about, what Black person is, running, this college. Or there's a brother who runs the Boston Foundation now. There's a brother who runs Bentley College. There's a business college, up in the Boston area. There's sisters who, bro, the stuff we do, it will blow your mind how much we have done that we don't know about, because we don't talk about it. And that's what Black Facts is about.
Gotcha.
We have everything we need in our community. That's what I believe. To solve our problems, to move ourselves forward, if we would just embrace ideas like the African philosophy of Ubuntu. Are you familiar with the philosophy of Ubuntu? Often characterized as, I am because we are. Basically, it's about, let's not do this individualism. That's like a very Western and definitely very American psychology. But to look at, I think the quote, I think it was Martin Luther King says, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Ideas like that say, I can't be okay if you're hurt, and
I like that idea right there, man.
Well, hey, I'm certainly not I'm saying, many of our cousins on the continent, This is their normal. You know, the Ubuntu philosophy. You know, I mean, imagine if we raised, you know, our folks to think that way. That doesn't mean you don't try and be successful. What it means is that, you know, you realize that you didn't come up with this all on your own. You're walking on the shoulders of giants who preceded you.
Right.
And if you want to make sure that the other folks who come after you are able to do it, you got to do your part. You got to pay it forward. You know,
Right.
we're all in this thing together on this rock. Unless Elon Musk, you know, gets to Mars, and I encourage him to be first. But you know, unless you know we start colonizing Mars, we're stuck here together, and you know we might as well. Just my opinion. You know, we might as well figure out how to put in a little extra effort to, you know, make sure that someone else is doing good. You know, because you know it makes it easier for all of us, man. It just makes
right, because we're all connected.
We are all connected.
Yeah,
we are all connected. Even though it's not my technology, you know, I encourage folks to get into LinkedIn, because when you say we're all connected, many of us have heard the idea of 6 degrees of separation. Well, in Black communities, it's more like 2 and 3 degrees of separation, right? You know, I would encourage anyone, you know, create an account, free account on LinkedIn, start seeing who you're connected to, because for networking, I'm one of these folks who, if I know that you're trying to be about something and I think I know someone who might be able to open a door for you, I'll try and connect you. You know, if I don't know you that well, I might say like, hey, you know, there's this guy, Rod. I don't really know him, but he seems like he's, you know, the right guy for, you know, that he might be able to, you know, you might be able to do this or that, you know, and I'm that guy who will, you know, get on someone and be like, yo, you need to check this person out. You know, I believe that if more of us did that, bro, we could solve so many of the problems that we have where we begging the folks who would sell us, you know, as you know, sell us in Home Depot 200 years ago. We expecting them to fix our problems and this and that. When folks
right,
get
and give us jobs and all that.
And ain't no one interested in giving you a job. They're interested in you making them money.
That's
You
it.
know, which I don't think is a bad thing if you understand it and you recognize it, and you don't work yourself to death for people who will forget you. You know, if the business decision, if corporate says we need to send you packing,
Right.
if you're working, give an honest day's work, do your job, et cetera, et cetera. But don't let them con you into thinking that you're family. You're not. You're a resource. You're an asset. To them. And the minute you become a liability, you'll be history. But then there's Black businesses who are trying to do things. I want to introduce you to folks like, Tawana Rivers, who runs the Black 10K project, where they put Black businesses in front of her membership, to potentially be investors and stuff. There are folks who are doing all kind of things, man, to try and go against these narratives that we don't have or we can't do. I'm like, nah. We just don't know, and we don't do enough. A lot of times we don't know about this other person who's doing X, Y, Z, and many times if we do know, we don't take that step. We don't take that action.
Right. Indeed.
Yeah.
So now going into this new AI era, what do you think we should know in this? Because I use Chat GPT sometimes. I'm looking at other apps to change video into like animation and things like that. So what do you think we should know now going into this AI era?
Right. And I'm checking the time because I know that our time is short. I would suggest this because I've been using ChatGPT like all day every day for about 2 years now. I don't create videos hands-on, so I can't speak to some of those. I'm more of a consumer, of some of the fun and crazy, different AI videos. I will say this, as a long-term technologist, etc., I've heard a lot of hype. To me, this is not hype. To me, AI, generative AI, is the first technology that requires zero technical skills to use it to become much more powerful at whatever you're trying to be. Why? Because you do not even need to know how to type, because this is it. On my phone, I can use the mouth that I know, the mouth that I know how to use, and the phone in my hand to say, hey, I'm interested in starting a community talk show for the Black community. What do you think I should do? Literally, you can start doing. Oh, that's a powerful idea. One of the potential idea, for real impact. Starting a Black community, blah, 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 whatever. Here's a step-by-step blueprint. Clarify your purpose. Pick a format. Design your segments. Well, opening monologue. I'm sorry, I didn't hit the audio thing. Opening monologue, main interview, community poll, spotlight, whatever. Tech setup, equipment, software, editing, distribution. Build a team, even small. Engage your community. Start with a pilot session. Bonus ideas. That's what I just got in seconds from that kind of question. That's what you can do, no matter what you're trying to do. And people talk about its bias and this and that. You know what? We in Black Facts, we use generative AI to generate educator tools for our videos on Black history. We have it generate quizzes, teacher talking points. So our thing is to enable educators to teach Black history and ethnic studies from any internet connected device, from these smart boards that they have on the walls to smartphone. This is what it looks like running on the phone. Black history videos, but we got quizzes and all that. That's the kind of thing you can do with AI. Would it recognize my face as well? Maybe not, but guess what? I'm not trying to do that. In the stuff I'm trying to do, It has saved me incredible amounts of time. It has put money in my pocket, and I'm as Black as you want to be all day, every day, and twice on Sunday. So, I'm not going to say that it can do anything you want to do as a Black person, but the ones that this Black person is needed to do, it's done it and helped me become incredibly efficient. I encourage anyone, learn it, because I believe the future is going to be created in the image of the people who understand how to master AI. So you can ignore it if you want, or you can use it. I recommend you be one of the ones that use it. That's just my personal suggestion.
Right, because there's now some kind of like AI revolution on online where it's like, no, not AI, but ChatGPT. Oh, ChatGPT, they're wrong, and you don't want to use them as a source because of this, that, and the third. Like, you go ahead.
you go ahead. Yeah, or sometimes say, you know what? Now, it's still today, at least as of today, still a free country. Like, you don't have to use it. If you're not going to use it, I recommend you sign up with the Amish. I hear they're very nice people. But if you're going to live in a modern society, if you don't learn how to use it, it's probably going to be using you.
Right.
It's like it just
like it is for sure.
I'm sorry?
Like AI is for sure. If you're on Facebook, if you're on
it's being put into everything. I view today as very similar to 30 years ago with the internet. When I was trying to get folks to use the internet, I literally would print out the homepage of stormfront.org, the white supremacist website, white pride worldwide. And I would say, look, there's this thing called the internet. These people are using it to put their message out. We can use it too. We didn't use it. What I mean is, name me some Black organization that's really leveraging technology. Maybe they just, I'm not in the right circles, but I'm not aware of any that are really using technology the way that it could be used. At this point, I believe AI because we're all starting at the same point. That was what I experienced with technology in the 90s. Everyone's starting at the same point. There's no old boy network to keep you out. You didn't need to have millions of dollars to get involved. Like if you want to do, say, a car industry or whatever, with AI, boom, free. Or I got a $20 a month subscription. Okay, you in New York, that's lunch one day. Okay, so don't even like don't be cheap like that. Oh, I want to use the free. Okay, fine. I don't even think when it comes to $20 a month. Come on now, are you serious? And I can answer. It answers questions for me all day. I got to do a research for. It's crazy, man. So anyway, I know that you said you had to jump to another thing, and someone is saying double check and verify. Oh, that is very true. It makes mistakes. Sometimes it gets what I call stuck on stupid, right? Yeah, we should probably do a whole session on AI. Yeah. That is absolutely the case. You want to double check. Yeah. I wouldn't, trust it without questioning. And if you're doing it for things like I do for programming, you better know your basics first, because it'll 80% of the time right on point. That other 20% can be a what.
Right. Indeed.
Yes, sir.
Indeed. Well, thank you for coming out this evening. We really appreciate you, brother Ken. Very informative. You broke down your history, and hope to have you back.
Right. All right. But remember, everybody, go to blackfacts.com. All right. Because as the shirt says, Black Facts Matter. This is our thing.
Right.
Every day you get the Black History video of the day. It's your recommended daily requirement of Black history.
Indeed. And really appreciate you. Thanks to everybody. We're on in a few minutes with Wise Asia from the 5% Nation. And we are out of here. Peace.